So I'm delighted to welcome a colleague from the UK who has set his alarm clock extraordinarily early to be with us this morning. So throughout the last day and a half, AI has come up several times. And as I said in my opening remarks yesterday, I think different countries around the world and different universities are still feeling their way around AI and deciding exactly how, if and how, it's going to be incorporated into teaching and learning. And Robin is our Director of External Affairs and has been spending a lot of time with universities around the world, talking to them about their approaches to AI and discussing strategy and ultimately best practice around AI. So without further ado, Robin, I'll hand over to you, and if you would like to share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everybody. Yes, it's early here, but it's actually very warm here. So actually, it's not too bad getting up because it was already light and it was already quite hot. So yeah, what I want to do today is take you through a little bit of where we are on AI in terms of research that we've done, both at a student level and an institution level, and then just show you as well where Kortext is from a product offering perspective. And I'm going to try and do a little bit of a live demo of that. Hopefully that will work a wee bit later on. And then what we'd love to understand as well is where I'm using UK examples and UK research. It would be great to understand where Australia is and APAC is in terms of the adoption of AI, and see if the patterns are at all similar across the educational establishment. So let me start to share my screen. So hopefully you can see that. That's obviously taken over that. That was just to just put this on full screen. Second. Okay, great. So I was hoping to be joined by my colleague Rachel this morning as well, which I think we probably still will be, but I will crack on with my bit anyway. So what I want to take you through, we've done two pieces of research this year. The first one is the Higher Education Policy Institution Student Generative AI Survey. Now, we've been running this for 3 years now, and it's really, in the UK, become the definitive survey of uptake of AI use by students. And quoted from government downwards, every conference I go to, they quote these numbers, which is actually very flattering. But so it's become the sort of definitive numbers. What we've also done as well is we've worked with another organization called Wonky to pull together an understanding where institutions are, and we call this research piece Educating the AI Generation. So if Rachel joins us, that's what she will go through. If not, I will take you through that. Then there's a Kortext offering, which is called Kortext IQ, which I'll take you through. And then, as I said, it would be wonderful to get your views on what you've heard from a UK perspective and how that reflects on the Australian education sector. So what are the key findings from the survey then? So what we saw this year, the real headline finding was that 95% of UK students were now using generative AI in their studies, and that's 94% in their assessments. So it's really become universal in terms of the use by students. They're all doing it effectively. And what we've seen is an extraordinary growth since we first started doing our survey in 2024. Obviously, ChatGPT was introduced in November 2022. So when we did our survey, it was actually late 23. So the results were from late 23. The adoption had already been phenomenal in terms of 65% use. We saw it climb to 92% last year, and now we're almost at a universal level of 95%. So the students have really jumped on board to AI and are using AI particularly strongly. And in terms of what they're saying, how their universities have responded, 65% of students say that their assessments have changed already because of AI, and universities are increasingly designing coursework that tests how students use AI. Now, I'm going to dig into that a wee bit later on because that's quite a high number. But what they're saying is, and I don't know if this happened in Australia as well, but sort of the response very much to universities when AI first came out was let's ban it, or let's put restrictions in place, or let's write policies, or there's quite a fear of the use of AI, and that still resonates today. So what students are saying is, whilst AI usage is now near universal, only 36% of students felt actively encouraged to use AI tools. Now, whilst 60% are saying yes, our assessments have changed because of AI, we're only seeing 36% saying there's an encouragement to use AI. And I hear lots and lots of stories. I've been on various webinars with leaders of students' unions who say most of their time is now spent on having to represent students around false accusations by the university of the misuse of AI. So there still is this mismatch between student use and encouragement of universities to use, and there still is, despite an understanding of how it might work and how it might develop, sort of a little bit of a paranoia and mistrust of AI because of the need for universities to really change. And we're going to sort of dive into that a wee bit later, but sort of a large part of this is understandable because universities have had to change so much more dramatically. It's okay for a student to, flick onto a commercial platform and drop a journal article in and get a summary or whatever that might be. Universities really are having to change everything they do, and we'll see from the university response that they would have to do that because assessment needs to change, learning needs to change, and really sort of there needs to be a big pivot from the universities. Hence, universities are behind students in their encouragement of using the use of AI. But this is really important because students recognise that AI skills are going to be essential for the workplace, and I always, those from Kortext would have heard me say this before. So, back in my day, putting the fact that you had a proficiency in Excel or PowerPoint or Word on your CV was actually, made you stand out. Obviously, no longer the case, but actually now putting a proficiency in AI onto your CV will make you stand out because companies aren't that far ahead either. Obviously, companies have been much quicker to adopt it, with Copilot, etc., into workflows, but they are looking for graduates to bring skills that they don't have into their workplace. And so I think this is a really important figure in terms of future ready students. Students recognize that these AI skills are essential for the workplace, and therefore, going back to that previous stat of the encouragement to use, universities do really need to catch up quickly because students need these skills in the UK, at least in quite a tight graduate market, and once students are actually looking for jobs post skills. And then in terms of usage, in terms of provision of tools, fewer than 40% of students said that university provides them with AI tools that they're permitted to use. And I think we'll come on to that later in terms of where the UK is at. But again, even where there's a permission to use, quite often is that you can use AI, but the university is not providing those tools. And that provides a real equity issue. So if you can afford to pay, then you have an advantage against those students who can't afford to pay because actually the university is not providing those tools. And again, this also relates to the discomfort students are feeling and the lack of support that students are feeling around universities actually providing them and tools to use and permitting them to use tools. But we are starting to see universities begin to invest at scale. So I'm going to show you a wee bit later. There's a couple of pilots that Kortext is running with the Side Business School at the University of Oxford and the University of Exeter, quite large-scale pilots of what we're calling Kortext IQ, which is a Kortext's VLE LMS integrated virtual tutor. And those are proven to be quite successful. And we've also seen the University of Manchester recently announce that they're going to buy enterprise licenses for Microsoft Copilot for all 65,000 students and staff. And actually speaking to an academic from the University of Manchester yesterday, that is those licenses have been purchased. They're beginning to be rolled out at Manchester, although they're still a little bit in the piloting phase as well in terms of understanding usage patterns and how that works, etc. And again, I'll talk to you a little bit later about how Kortext can integrate with those Microsoft Copilot licenses. In terms of that embedding into the VLE, I think that's really important because it's about putting the AI into the student's workflow. And that's something I'll show you a wee bit later in terms of, certainly in the UK, when students are working, more often than not, they will have the VLE, the LMS open to understand what the task is and to access the resources. So putting that chat interface in terms of that virtual tutor interface directly into the learning management system is really, really important for usage. All right, so at the end of the HEPI survey, they are a policy institute. They are very much listened to within UK higher education and government, and they came up with 5 recommendations for institutions based on what was being seen from the survey, from the research. So number 1 was provide structured AI induction and transition support for all students, and that's very much that equity issue which I mentioned earlier. Consider revamping curricula to explicitly teach AI knowledge and skills at both the general and subject specific levels. Easier said than done. That's a big task, but does need doing. Publish clear, accessible and assessment specific guidance on AI use. We are seeing a lot of, and anecdotally in the survey, a lot of student anxiety about what they are and aren't permitted to do. And so that clear, accessible assessment, specific guidance is really important, acknowledging that the technology is changing all the time. Ensure that the AI tools necessarily or advantageous for course content or assessment are accessible to all students. But like the first one, very much related to the equity issue, all students need to have the equal chance of getting on. If AI tools are now necessary for that, then the university provision becomes very, very important. And the other thing that we're going to dig into a wee bit later is ensure staff have access to AI training. I think a lot of the support gap between students and universities comes down to how universities have supported staff in the uptake of AI, and a little bit of suspicion still around staff about what the technology can do, because obviously it's a change to what we have done in the past, and there needs to be time to invest in developing the skills as well. So I'll leave that there for a couple of seconds to get the full research report there. Let me just scan that QR code and you'll be able to see the full research from the Higher Education Policy Institute. Okay, so moving on to our next piece of research. Rachel, are you there?
I apologise to everybody. I didn't have this link. I had a link for a different meeting. So I'm sat there wondering where everybody is. And of course, thankfully, Teams did its favour and let me access your link, Robin. So I do apologise for being late and missing the start of this.
No problem whatsoever. So I'll let Rachel take on the second piece of research, which was with institutions, which we called Educating the AI Generation.
Thank you so much, Robin, and good afternoon, everybody. Good to be with you. It's early morning here in the northwest of Scotland, but it's bright and it's beautiful, so I will take that as a good day. So each year, Kortext undertake a topical research project in conjunction with an organisation called Wonky, which is a UK higher education policy analysis platform. You may have heard of them, maybe not, but this year our project focused on educating the AI generation. So what we were thinking about really is what does AI mean for those people who are at the coalface of teaching and learning in institutions? And again, there's another QR code there that you can scan in order to download the full white paper. So if we can have the next slide, Robin, just in a little while when people have had a chance to look at it. But what we did was we held 3 roundtable events over the course of a couple of months. 2 of those were with senior leaders from institutions here in the UK who have a level of institutional responsibility for AI. And the third one was with educators who themselves are grappling with the implications of AI for their own teaching practice. And we also gathered feedback from 2 sector-wide events that were held by Wonky. But ultimately, the conclusions in the report are those of the 2 authors, so myself and then Debbie McVitie, who's from Wonky, rather than representing the aggregate view of the HE sector in the UK. And that's intentional because obviously there's a lot of sort of working out and contextualising that institutions need to do in the light of the findings in the report. But educating the AI generation proved to be a very interesting project. We set out to discover what universities are doing to support and help educators to navigate the opportunities and challenges that come with the use of AI in higher education, because we wanted to better understand how this AI disruption is impacting those colleagues involved at the front line of teaching students, how it has impacted their own practice, their skills development, the teaching content, their approach, their assessment, and so on. And as we say in the white paper, in one sense, we actually failed to answer our own question. Participants in the research made it very clear that educating the AI generation is not about developing blanket institutional policies, or about putting quick fixes in place, or even about developing minimum standards in response to AI. And the evidence from our work shows very strongly that these blanket approaches simply don't work in a space that is this complex. And that rather people need to come to their own understanding of the application of AI in their disciplinary and professional contexts, and to be able to talk to students about it with an open mind. And the research showed that what we are dealing with here is not just a new tool or even a new suite of tools, but actually it's a profound change in the conditions under which learning, teaching, and assessment take place. And so the real challenge that the senior leaders identified that they are facing is how do they create the conditions that properly empower staff and students to use AI critically, carefully, and in their best interests. And one of the things that we identified was that there is a need for mass upskilling of educators, mainly, and funnily enough, in pedagogy. And we are a bit nervous over the limitations of the existing mechanisms that we have to achieve this, especially when many of the people that we spoke to are either strongly opposed to, or concerned about, or not confident about AI and what it can do. Now, there's some quite bold statements in there, so it will be interesting to sort of capture thoughts about, to have a think about, you know, as I continue to present, maybe think about what that means in your context, because we'd like to pick that up in the discussion at the end. And I'm going to highlight 3 main messages from our findings. So next slide, Robin, please. The first one is about moving then from policy to positive frameworks, given what I've already said about blanket policies not working. So one of the strongest messages that came out of the research is that institutions need to move away from what you might call rearguard, compliance-led responses towards a more positive and enabling framework. And that means shifting the conversation away from what is allowed to what problem is it that we're trying to solve. Now, that reframing really matters because AI touches multiple interdependent aspects of academic practice at once. It touches pedagogy, learning support, assessment, and employability. And so what the project highlighted, therefore, is that conversations around the use of AI in higher education are as much a pedagogical challenge as they are a technological one. Yes, staff and student upskilling is required, certainly, but it's more than just how do we use the tools. And from a staff perspective, it was really about supporting educators to think differently about learning design, about assessment authenticity, and about the kinds of skills that we are trying to induct into students into as members of their disciplines. Crucially, we heard that effective institutional responses need to make piloting and testing a normal practice, not as isolated innovation projects, but as a core part of how universities learn what works. And these pilots need to be anchored in clearly articulated challenges, whether they are at the individual level, at course level, or at institutional level. And they also need to be transparent about their intended outcomes. And as Robin's going to talk about, this is where we at Kortext can support, because our aim is to be that trusted technology partner where we can provide those right tools that will support educators and that can create those safe and secure environments in which this experimentation can happen responsibly. Okay, next slide, Robin, please. And as I said earlier, it's clear that those blanket policies simply don't work in a space that is this complex. And so rather, one of the standout findings from the contributors was that instead of this rigid policy, what we need is this institutional framework, or something that is closer to a set of principles or guardrails to define a minimum standard for safety, that define the ethical use of AI, and that maintain quality standards in learning and teaching, giving educators the needed clarity and reassurance for experimentation, while still allowing interpretation at the local level that supports that disciplinary ownership and contextualization. So let me just be clear about that. The minimum standard is not in the use of AI, but it's around how to preserve safety, how to use AI ethically, and how to maintain quality in learning and teaching. And across all four of the areas that I mentioned earlier, teaching, learning, assessment, and employability, the evidence points to significant upskilling needs, but also to the limits of these centralized approaches. Faculty, the educators that we spoke to, need clarity and reassurance from their leaders, but they also need the space to determine what makes sense in their own disciplinary and curricular contexts. And so that's where the infrastructure around AI becomes absolutely critical. And the project highlights the importance of ring-fenced, secure environments that are underpinned by institutional data and institution-produced learning, teaching, and critically, research content. And together, these data sets enable us to produce structured insights that can be used to enrich academic learning experiences, both the student learning experience, but also the learning and teaching environment. And there are two case studies in the white paper, one from Said Business School at Oxford and one from the University of Exeter, which are exploring how we have been enabling that ring-fenced secure use of AI within staff and student workflows through the VLE. And Robin is going to demonstrate that shortly. And what we can do then is harness the data from the student platforms that we have. We have a delivery environment through our student applications, and shortly, all of Kortext platforms are going to have embedded AI capability, meaning that we will also have the necessary tools for supporting both educators and students alike in their use of AI within higher education. And so thereafter, there are two key questions that are particularly important. And it is, how do institutions make sure that they are embedding AI into student and academic workflows in ways that encourage uptake and use? And how do we teach learners to use AI responsibly in situations where those safeguards are built into the system rather than relying on trust alone? And so when Robin demonstrates Kortext IQ shortly, what you're going to see is that our AI tooling is, as I said earlier, ring-fenced and secure because it is limited to the data sources that the institution deems appropriate for learning. And it is embedded within academic and student workflows within the VLE, and it can make full use of institutional data and institution-produced learning and teaching content and those research outputs. And so we can deploy embedded AI capability in ways that are ethical, contextually relevant, and aligned with institutional values. And if you think about the ways that we might introduce students to library skills or to research skills, these induction-style interventions can be used to show how AI capability can be normalized as part of academic development, rather than treated as an exceptional risk. And as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about pilots, that is one of the really positive interventions that we focused on in the white paper. And in this context, we're talking about piloting as a mechanism for experimentation, for development of practice for understanding the conditions in which an AI-enabled approach to a specific challenge can be successful. Pilots that are anchored in clearly articulated challenges, which are transparent about those outcomes, not necessarily pilots of software that has already been purchased prior to rollout, but pilots that can provide more empirical evidence that support procurement decisions. And so this white paper gives us the wider framing that helps explain why these difficulties and these issues around AI are both so difficult, but also so important. Because AI is giving us an opportunity and a pressure to reimagine and examine some of those long-standing assumptions that we have about learning and teaching. Because it's forcing institutions to confront some key questions, such as what are the human skills that we value? How do we induct students into disciplinary ways of thinking and of practicing? And how do we design assessment that values the process, iteration and development, and not just the final outputs? And what the project makes clear is that it is not sustainable for students to have widely different experiences of AI-enabled learning, depending on their program or module, or their educators' preferences. But at the same time, the pace of technological change in this area makes it very hard for leaders to provide certainty or definitive answers. And so the solution that was suggested consistently across the evidence from the research is to create institutions that value curiosity over certainty, that allow space for productive discomfort, and that support experimentation within clear, ethical non-negotiables. So to conclude then, the key finding from the project is not that institutions need better AI policies, but they need better conditions in which to learn about AI. And that means moving away from compliance towards enablement. It means investing in pedagogy as much as in technology. It means supporting staff ownership and professional judgment. And it means using that secure infrastructure and piloting to turn uncertainty into evidence. AI is not simply something that we can plug into existing practice. It is a paradigm shift. And responding well to it requires openness, trust, and a willingness to rethink what higher education is ultimately for. Thank you, Robin. Back to you.
Thanks, Rachel. That's excellent. Right. Okay, we're going to discuss those findings a wee bit later. And again, as I said, understand the relevance of those in the Australian higher education context. But what I want to do to begin with is just introduce to you what we've called Kortext IQ. So Kortext IQ is our integrated AI assistant, connecting teaching, learning and analytics in a seamless AI-driven educational platform. Now, I'm sure the fact that you're at this conference, you will sort of understand the suite of products that Kortext offer, from our sort of study platform with all of the publisher content on it. Obviously, the reading list system in terms of Talis, which sorts that and prioritizes that. We have our Stream learner analytics platform, so you can understand student engagement in real time, and also you can understand engagement at a cohort level. And we've got a number of other sort of applications that sit on top of what we call Fusion, which is our data architecture. Now, across the top of all that, is and will be what we call Kortext IQ, which will be our AI agent. And where we started applying our AI agent is into the field of teaching and learning. We are also developing one for Stream, we're developing one for libraries, we're developing one for Talis. Our starting point, however, is really what is a virtual assistant or virtual tutor for students that starts pulling together streams of information for the student into a coherent platform and a coherent AI tool. So let me talk to you a little bit what that is. So in terms of our philosophy, our design philosophy, and our, how we go about things, key to that is that we're delivering to institutions responsible and trusted AI. What that means is a platform which is based on Microsoft. We're a Microsoft partner. We are the first, certainly in Europe, to gain Microsoft certification for educational AI, and everything we do is worked in a ring-fenced environment. So what that often means is that we're only indexing content that is within your learning environment and is trusted and is academic. When we design things, they're pedagogically focused. Write me my essay. No, I can't do that, but I can help you in this way. So it's all about assisting pedagogy and being integrated in pedagogy. Key point of difference to virtually anyone else is embedded in the learning content. So we're indexing at scale learning content. So that the core textbooks and journal articles and the real information that you want students to learn from, that is where the answers are being pulled from. So I'll show you that a wee bit later. And also we can get you up and running very, very quickly in terms of the scale of deployment and integration into your learning management system. So what's our approach to data aggregation? So what we're doing is, if a query is put into Kortext IQ, it's indexing against both structured and unstructured data sets. So your structured data sets are sort of that's sitting in the VLE in terms of announcements, etc. The unstructured data sets is at scale. We can index pages of content. And what is that content? Well, we've managed to upload 300 million plus OA journal articles, which are sitting in 12,000 university repositories around the world. We've got hundreds of thousands of OER books, so open education resources, ebooks, which again are available to higher education establishments. We've aggregated those and we're indexing against those. We've working with all of the publishers, and most of them are now on board for us to be able to index their content as well that sits on the Kortext platform. We've obviously got integration that we're building into reading lists. Talis is now part of the Kortext family, and so we're able to integrate your reading list, not the content that sits behind the reading list, but we can index against the metadata within the reading list, so we can point students towards content that's sitting within your university library, and then they were able to read that content from there. And then we're obviously able to take that data, push that into our Kortext platform, our stream platform, and understand how universities and how students are actually using AI. So what might that look like? So I'm going to take you through our pilot that has all been referenced by Rachel, which is at University of Oxford Saïd Business School, who are our first partner on this. So certain needs from Saïd Business School. Number one was to drive return on investment, actually get cost savings. There is a strong feeling at Oxford that they are Oxford University, students should be studying from Oxford publications, and yet most of what was being taught in the Saïd Business School was coming from Harvard Business School publications. So there was a desire to tap into what is being produced at Oxford and what is actually sitting in repository at Oxford, but isn't actually indexable. So we can do that with what we're doing. There's also a desire that students, there are Canvas LMS, that students could use AI to better navigate Canvas. Canvas is sometimes a wee bit hard to sort of find your way around, to cross-reference resources that are sitting within Canvas. So how can they create an automated personalized content and workflow generation there, therefore delivering a better student experience? Also, how can tutoring be online 24/7? How can students get constant support for what they're doing, not just accessing the academics and when they've got opportunity to access the academics? And then where can that sort of data and insight of understanding come from around how students are actually using AI? How can there be actionable dashboards? And how can you optimize content design and cost? So that's really some needs around Oxford. What they were looking at is pulling together workflows. So the reading list, which in their case is Ex Libris, in terms of Microsoft, their Canto repository, Canvas, and obviously Kortext. So what does that look like? I'm going to click out of this presentation now and hopefully go into, that has worked. Great. So I'm in the live environment here. So I'm actually in the MBA environment at Side Business School. And what I've been able to do, if I were to, I've already done it, I've clicked that button there, which is opened up within the LMS a chat interface. And I'll just, obviously thinks it's evening for me. It normally would say morning. So let's just check it's actually awake. It's always going to be a bit slower because I'm obviously going through Teams in terms of my response. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So the logic we've got is that if you go to any coffee shop, the LMS is usually open. The students is referencing what the task is that they've been set or what the learning has been set. So we wanted the chat interface to select directly into the learning environment. So it's directly into the LMS. And so if I'm a student, my task on session 6, marketing effectiveness, is around understanding how what I'm doing from a marketing perspective is actually working. And it's introducing a concept to me, which actually I've not heard of before, which is called customer lifetime value, or CLV. It's also linked through to a case study. So it's actually linked to a Harvard case study. And I've already opened that case study, downloaded it because it was downloadable, and I've uploaded it onto my Kortext platform. And I'll show you how that will work later. So my first thought, and I've already preloaded this prompt, is, well, what exactly is customer lifetime value? How can the AI assess me or assist me in understanding the actual concept that's being taught? So my first prompt is explain the concept of customer lifetime value. And as I said, it's a wee bit slow because I'm sharing through Teams. All right. So what we've got, so our base LLM is a GPT 4.1 within the Microsoft environment. And that's important to understand because being within the Microsoft environment means that we can link into Azure Data for AI Foundry, and we can pull different LLMs in, which are applicable to a specific module or a specific course. But we're using 4.1 here. So the first thing 4.1 is doing is that it's summarizing all of the sources of information that I've got available to give me an overall answer, an overall summary, to tell me that customer lifetime value is a metric that estimates the total profit a company can expect from a customer over an entire duration. Then it's going into the specific sources of information that's indexed against. So when it says from my library, it's actually indexing against books which are on the Kortext platform. So these are already been assigned to the student and they're on the Kortext platform, and it's pulling from there. And it's showing me that it's pulled from page 93 of that book. And I'm going to click through to that book in a second, because again, I can click directly to the book that it's been pulled from. It's also showing me on this prompt that I've got content sitting on Canvas that is relevant to my prompt, and again, it's used that content to provide my initial answer. So it's gone into this session 6 and pulled that information out. It's gone back to session 1 and pulled this information out. And again, I can click directly to that page in Canvas. So again, helping me with that point of Canvas navigation. But if I just come back here, where was it? Principles of Marketing, page 93. So actually from the VLE, from the LMS, I can click and directly open the Kortext platform and go to directly the page that the information has been indexed against. And so you can see I'm at a page level here, and then I immediately got some additional AI tools that I can use as a student. So I've got some tools that we introduced, this is September 2023 actually, which means that I can read aloud the page, I can do a page summarization, I can do study notes, so I can create some study notes on the page, and I can quiz myself on the page. And shortly we're going to do that, introduce those at a chapter level. Equally, I can open an IQ, and then the IQ will work specifically against the book that is in the reader, because I'm in the Kortext reader. So I'm now drilling down at a book level. And again, if I put that same query in, you can see that. So I'm drilling down now at a book level, and I can use IQ again to actually, go through the book and pull information directly from the book that I'm looking at. And I've just used the same concept, so it's going to give me a pretty similar page reference. There we go. It's also, we'll go back into Canvas and pull from there as well. But as you can see, it's specifically pulling from that book. So at page 92, you've got that information. Page 93, you've got that information. And again, page 93, you've got that information, but it's directly to another page there. And again, it's giving me a summary of where it's pulled that from there. So that's what we can do at book level. If I then click through to here, I've got all of my previous prompts. So I've got my prompt history. You also have that prompt history within the VLE and the LMS as well. But I've got my prompt history here, and I can just go back into a previous prompt, open that up, and work with that in previous prompt stream that I've got to. Okay, and then if I go into my library, you can see all of my books that I've been provisioned here, which my institution has provisioned me. Again, I've got an IQ, so I can search at a multiple book level here to find out the information I want. And if I just go to my files, what I'm able to do with my files is upload all of the external information. So if I've got PowerPoints from lectures, there's a PowerPoint there from a lecture. If I've got case studies, so Blue Apron, which is that case study that is on the LMS, I can upload that. And again, all of that information can be indexed via Kortext IQ. So again, let me show you, if I go on to another prompt, I just pre-prepared some prompts just so you don't have to sort of see my very slow typing. So if I just copy that in there. So I'm getting into the case study now. So remember, the case study was on Harvard. It was sitting here. I uploaded it. I've uploaded it to my Kortext platform. So I'm specifically interrogating the case study around Blue Apron and its integration of customer lifetime value into its strategy. And so what that prompt will do, again, it will dive into that case study and really good analysis of that case study for me, but it will also go into my other learning content as well and find what's relevant for my other learning content, and it will give me that initial summary. So again, I've got that initial summary of customer lifetime value, how it all works. It's pointing me to books that I've got on my bookshelf, which will be relevant to my prompt around Blue Apron. Again, that page 93 there, again, around main in that book. And then in my files, it's found the specific Blue Apron case study. So at page 10, it's pulling that point from there. Page 8, we're pulling from there. Page 4, from pulling it there. But it's also pulling from, so previously I've gone into the books and I've gone into the case studies and I've created notes on those. So that note function, I can highlight sections, create notes, create summary, etc. And I've built that into a workbook. So now I've got a previous workbook on Blue Apron, and it's also indexing back to there. So it's referring me back to content that I've previously created myself and indexing against that. And once again, it's indexing against Canvas. But I just wanted to show you, so if I click through there, so remember, this case study was originally on Harvard. It's now on the Kortext platform, and it's opening up in Kortext, and it's opening up in the Kortext reader. So the student has got that consistent experience when they're opening any content. And that experience, and again, I can open up an IQ, and the IQ will be then referencing and indexing against the specific case study. So the whole of that case study, I can interrogate, and I can interrogate, and I can interrogate, and I can keep going deeper into the content area. Again, if that's a PowerPoint from an academic, it's exactly the same reader experience from Kortext. So this becomes sort of like the adjunct, as it were, to the LMS in terms of storing all the information you need on there and then really working with that information. So that is the demo there. I just wanted to show a couple of other things, a couple of other prompts I'm going to put in because I think they're interesting. So number one is that you can work in multiple languages. So if I just ask this, for instance, to create me a multiple choice test on customer lifetime value, again, it's going to pull from all my content that I've got, and I've asked it to actually do that in Arabic. And it will pull it. Obviously, the references will be in English, but the actual multiple choice test it's creating is actually in Arabic. There we go. Again, it's referencing, elements of the of Canvas in there. And if I'm an academic, I can also use it to start helping me design modules or, design learning outcomes, multiple choice tests, etc. So again, I'm just asking this to I've said I'm module leader on integrated marketing communications module. Can you help me plan my integrated marketing communications module for year 2 undergraduates? And I've had an idea that we can do something around the launch of a vegan ice cream. So again, I'm basing it in marketing, and it will give me my top line module outline for an 8-week module on the launch of a vegan ice cream brand. I can use it to create my opening presentation. I can use it to create my learning objectives. I can use it to create my marketing schedule. I can go deeper into a session, say the market research element of it, and go much deeper. So there it goes. Create weekly breakdown, week 5, week 6, etc. Create some additional notes, and again it's giving me references down here of content and I can actually pull from. And I've done this previously, so I've actually created an opening presentation from that, and it's starting to pull from that I created from before. And again, it's telling me in Canvas I've also got these other sessions that I've already got in Canvas which are relevant to what I'm doing. So I just want to show you that in terms of Kortext IQ and how it works. If I just go back to my presentation now, I want to kick through that slide and then just go back into here. Okay, so integration wise, we do seamlessly integrate into the 4 major BLEs, LMSs. So we've already got pilots up and running in Moodle. We've already got pilots up and running with Canvas. We will in September have pilots up and running at large scale pilots up and running scale at Blackboard University and at D2L University. And we're very open now because we've got the technology established and embedded to sort of run pilots, and we can very quickly turn those pilots on. The D2L one's going to be 3,000 students, 80 modules. So, we can do them at scale in your university. The other thing is for universities that are committing to Copilot Enterprise, so not just the internet version, but Enterprise Copilot, we have built agents that will integrate into there. So as a Microsoft partner, and we've had access to be able to do that, and we've got an agent that can be attached to Copilot. So if Copilot is your chat interface within your VLE, it will then index against the Kortext platform in a very similar way to what I've shown, because that agent can be attached to Copilot. So that can help it work as well. Now, that's where we currently are. I just want to give you a little view into now I'd call this near future, because the next step onwards isn't just indexing the learning content, is how can we index the other sources of information that the students have access to. So how can I link out to timetabling? How can I link out to assessment? How can I link out to sort of information on well-being? So there's other ports of information that the students are really interested in, and we'll give them that sort of even more holistic experience. And we can do that via something called a module context protocol, MCP app, MCP server, MCP layer, which really enables us to pull together different sources of information, again, centered on the LMS, and then provide structured answers to students. So I just want to show you a little bit of video of what that will look like. Let's get that to play. Here we go. So I've just got some prompts here, which a student might ask. So using MCP protocol. And it really starts pulling together different sources of information and sourcing them. So I'm a student, what should I be focusing on this week? You've got a marketing lecture on Thursday, but you haven't yet completed the core reading. Would you like me to create a summary of the key concepts of reading? So it's pulling from the Kortext platform, and it's pulling from the timetabling platform. Well, how am I doing in this module? Actually, currently you're sitting at 58% overall. Again, it's linking to the Kortext platform and to the reading, and say, if you read chapter 5, 20 to chapter 6, students tend to improve. Do you want me to help you with that in terms of writing the summary? I don't understand the concept, a little bit like my prompt before. So based on your module, chapter 7 covers this, you've got lecture size captures this, you've only actually looked at 20% of this reading topic. Again, do you want me to help you with that topic? A little bit of wellbeing support. It won't provide advice for students, but it'll point students to where that support can be had from. So linking through to student support services and what's available on the student support website. So as you can see, we're starting to join up those different sources of information that are sitting outside the LMS currently that students have to click out from, but you can actually start to join up those different sources of information. This is where I got stuck yesterday in terms of I have to share my screen for a second. Let's get out of that. Okay, so just to finish this off, I'm going to reshare my screen. Take that away. Oh, right. Okay. So just to finish off, I've already mentioned about Copilot, integration into Copilot. The other thing is, what have you got behind the scenes? So at a university level, you've got the ability to control what is being suggested, what is being pushed to your students using the AI. So you can block profanity, filter information, etc., restrict medical advice, all of that thing. Make sure you can restrict it going outside. So at the moment, the way I've got it set up, if I ask it for the weather in Oxford, it won't be able to tell me that because we've stopped it going outside. We're just pulling from the key learning content. The other thing you're able to do is at a module level, control things like response rate, temperature of response, enable RAG, so it's just using a retrieval of the key information that it's pointed at. And you can also choose the agent as well. So again, from a cost perspective and a need perspective, at the moment we're focusing on 4.1 in terms of GPT 4.1. But for an architecture group, they might want 5.5 or whatever LLM sits within the Microsoft Foundry, then we can change that at a module level. Obviously, there are cost implications around that based on if the students are using it to create videos, that's going to burn an awful lot of tokens as opposed to just a response that I've been doing there. But we give you that information and we give you that ability. We also give you the opportunity to pull from different sources of information, so the LMS or research or SharePoint or whatever it might be. So we give you that sort of option there to pull from different sources of information. And then ultimately what we provide to you is a knowledge graph so you can see how students are prompting. So if I've just done a lecture on customer lifetime value, I'm seeing lots and lots of prompts of explain customer lifetime value to me. I know I might need to recover that in my next face-to-face session with my students or in the seminar group or whatever. So you're providing that knowledge graph of how students are actually interacting. And I think this is my final chart, just from the CAO at Side Business School, University of Oxford, talking about introducing the Kortext Canvas AI Assistant, which is IQ. It's a fundamental part of their digital strategy, which focuses on agility, data, and innovation. What they're trying to do is provide new technology through generative AI, agentic AI, workflow process automation to make the school, more importantly, the learner experience enriched and more efficient. This new assistant will be a fundamental part of that. So that's just our endorsement from there. And here's how it fits into the Kortext infrastructure. So, all that data into our data platform, which is Fusion. IQ sits on top of that. And then you've got our student platform, you've got librarian platforms such as Talis, you've got academic platform, you've got student experience, and you've got leadership information. So at that, I will hand over to Rachel to talk about next steps.
No, well, to have a discussion with everybody in the room. So I don't know who is in the room on whether how this is quite going to work, but we're going to have an attempt at just having a bit of a conversation about the different things that Robin and I have shared with you today. I think my first question really for the audience is, we obviously shared the findings of two research projects, the HEPI one and the Wonky project, which are both from a UK perspective. And what we're really interested to understand is whether those findings and whether that research resonates with you as an Australian audience. So do our findings sort of reflect the conversations that you and your colleagues and the sector in Australia is having around AI? And I don't know how we're going to get this back. So I'm hoping we can make this work, and we can hear people.
I think we've got Michael. Can you hear me, Rachel?
I can, Simon. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. So we've got in the room, we've got about 5, 6 different tables. I think we've got a roving mic. So I'm hoping that if we use the mic, you and Robin will be able to hear, but this is probably going to be a bit of an experiment. So who's...
I love a bit of an experiment, though.
Well, indeed, yes, we are that type of company after all. So who's got any reflections on either the HEPI paper, the wonky paper? There were also those recommendations as well from HEPI. That would be quite interesting to see how many of the Australian and New Zealand institutions are perhaps already implementing those sorts of recommendations. You might need to just put those back up on the screen, Robin, as a refresher, perhaps. If you know. Anybody got any initial feedback, thoughts? Thank you very much for volunteering. Hello.
Can you hear me there, Rachel?
Say again.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can.
Hello, my name's Hugh. So my thoughts on this are that I think the environment, like you will probably get similar findings based just obviously I haven't read the report based on what you described. I don't think I agree with your interpretation of the findings, but I think I would say that the findings as described sound like right to me. If that makes sense. You're probably going to ask me to expand on this. So I guess, yeah, there were some strong words used there, particularly by Robin. Words like paranoia, which I think I would have a different perspective on. But I think it's true that universities are really scrambling to, well, maybe not scrambling now, but have had to make a big change in the way they look at assessment and teaching. And I think probably a lot of people would agree that it's exposed to pre-existing problems with pedagogy that now need to be addressed. I guess the question is, what is the actual problem with pedagogy and how does it need to be addressed? So is the problem that AI has exposed a need for more critical thinking skills, for example, or is the problem that we just need to train students to use AI? Because one of the other things AI skills, which sounds really vague to me, I'm not really sure what we mean by students learning AI skills, and then put on that.
So you sound a little bit like you're underwater. I don't know if it's the same for you, Robin. So I'm picking up about 60% of what you're saying. But I think what I did pick up was that you don't necessarily agree with all of our findings, and that sort of you were focusing in on kind of what is the problem, and is it about skills or is it about learning to use the tools? Is that accurate? It might not be, because I said I'm not hearing everything clearly.
We're changing the experiment midway through.
Hello, can you hear me better?
Okay. Yes, I can. Yes, let's do that. Hi.
Hello. So I guess what I'm reflecting is I think the findings do resonate. It sounds like if you asked universities here the same questions, you'd probably get similar answers.
Yep.
But I think what to do as a result of those findings, we may not agree. We might not have the same thoughts on that, I guess. So what I was trying to say is, yes, a lot of people here would probably agree that there's an issue with pedagogy that has been exposed by the rise of AI tools.
Yeah.
But the big question is, what's the next action in response to that? Because it depends what you think the problem is that has been exposed. if that makes sense. Is it that we need to teach more AI skills, or is it that AI has exposed problems in education more broadly that require us to think about things differently?
And what do you think the answer to that is?
Well, I don't think universities are in the business of teaching skills. I think we're in the business of educating students. So
yeah,
I think the big thing is, you know, students need to know how to critically assess information. And that's obviously the thing that AI tools can make harder in some ways, but also that's the big challenge that they kind of have honed in on.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's prompted a real debate here in the UK about the role. There's a wider political conversation going on around skills development as well, but it has really kind of prompted a lot of consideration about that kind of balance between not just knowledge acquisition, but, you know, application of that knowledge and understanding that you get through university and skills development, and what's the balance between the two. And, you know, is it all about one or is it all about the other? No, it's probably about both, you know, and in order to to use the knowledge and understanding that you've acquired, you have to have skills in communication and using AI and so on. So maybe we're not so far different on those implications, I guess, as a result. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that in the room? You'd like to come up and speak to the computer? Because that was much clearer.
Whilst you're coming up, I'll add into that as well. I think a lot of the sessions I've been in have actually focused on going back to some learning fundamentals. So, you know, a lot of the use of AI comes down now to judgment, because you are being given a lot of information. You saw from the prompts that I was putting in that, yes, the answers are rooted in the academic content. So hallucinations, etc., are well reduced on what, if it was going out to the internet and sort of what's been trained on there. But, you know, those old school skills of you know, taking a poem and pulling apart the stanzas and what did the poet mean from that, that, you know, if you were a schoolboy and sitting there and saying, well, what am I doing that for? Actually, to put that now in context, that becomes really, really important, because my judgment of what is being fed me is now really, really crucial to understand and, you know, critically evaluate, you know, the information that's been pushed back to me from an AI perspective. So I think a lot of the conversations that Rachel and I have had with the sector in the UK have been around, you know, a little bit getting back to some of those learning fundamentals that, you know, may have been passed over in the last sort of few years or months.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, actually, Robin. And we've been having a lot of conversations too around surface and deep learning. And that kind of conversation, I think, Robin, I saw in your demonstration there, you know, it's the AI there isn't doing all of your thinking for you, but it is signposting you to where you can do that learning for yourself. And I think that, for me, is absolutely critical, because if all you're doing is outsourcing your thinking, you're not actually developing, you know, that ability to think critically and to apply your knowledge and understanding for yourself. So, does anybody in the room want to come up and contribute to this conversation?
Volunteers from speaking to the computer. This is becoming one of the oddest hybrid sessions facilitated ever. So it's great. Are we recording this? Okay. Right.
G'day.
But I love it.
Hi there.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
We can,
Yeah.
yes.
So I'm Kieran. Sort of as an addendum to Hugh's question, particularly regarding well, my question is predominantly around institutional reaction, particularly from the Said Business School regarding the pilot, and the impact of, or their view of the impact of the Kortext IQ virtual assistant upon the actual skills and learning development of their students. I'm asking primarily because while Rachel did mention that Kortext IQ, for example, signposts where a student can go and everything. AI summaries, there's a tendency that I've observed where people implicitly trust an AI summary as being an accurate summarization of a piece of work. I think as well, it's coming from the social sciences and humanities, it can impact on a student's interpretation of the text if they are not having to think through reading a text, think through even skimming a text, and they're like, well, the AI said this argument about historiography proved X, Y, and Z points, and so on and so forth. And I think as well, particularly pursuant to one of the examples shown in the video, is the fact that depending on the level of integration, a student can bypass even the basic tasks of looking at weekly content, looking at their unit site. And from while I do agree with Hugh that universities are should be at least in the business of educating students, there is a tendency to focus on the preparation of students for the workforce. And I think in that regard, is there a concern from institutions such as, say, business school or more broadly in the ways in which that sort of virtual assistant is impacting on students' even basic time management or organizational skills?
Yeah, really good points. I don't think that there's enough evidence to sort of fully answer those questions. I think if I come back to one of the objectives from Said, I think this is interestingly, because obviously it's a Talis session, the reading list. I think there's a view, particularly at Oxford, that there's an awful lot of reading for students to do. There's still here's your essential text, but here's 25 other texts that we want you to sort of read around this subject. And there's a view that being Oxford students diligently, they will do that. Just the nature of the student, it may well be different at a mid-tier university. So one of the things that Oxford has embraced is actually using the AI to help students get through the reading. So actually sort of manage the volume of work. And I know that isn't always the case across every university. So I think that's one of the positives that they're seeing. I think the jury's still out on some of the questions that you're asking. The thing I would say when you move into the workplace and how AI is being used in the workplace, some of the things that we used to do, we're just not doing anymore. So for instance, if I'm now writing, as Rachel asked you to do yesterday, writing a paper on something, I will be feeding the points in, Copilot will give me that initial draft, and then I will be prompting to get to where I want to go. The human will still be in it in terms of I will be taking that and I will be editing it. But I think there will be a change which academia needs to come with to how you can now get to an answer. But you're quite right that we need to ensure that some of the skills, critical thinking, evaluation, judgment, etc., are still built into that learning process. So that doesn't quite answer your question of what they're saying back to us. But that's kind of talking to a lot of people and also reflecting on my lived experience, where we need to get to, but it does reflect on the 36% support for universities to students using AI, because that is what's being grappled with. Rachel.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I think your question, Kieran, really speaks to that point about pedagogy, and kind of what you're doing and how you're using AI. And a former colleague of mine took issue on LinkedIn recently with, everybody sort of talks about the human in the loop when you think about AI, and where does the human think in this? And he said, no, it's not. He said, it's where is AI in the human loop? Where is AI supporting the learning and teaching and not replacing it and doing it for you? And for me, that's absolutely critical. And it was the phrase I used in my presentation about, or mentioned earlier, about not outsourcing your thinking. I think that there's sort of, it's how you use AI. And I think that's why that one key research finding around having the space to think about how AI can be used appropriately, critically in your discipline is so important, because if you're just using it as to substitute for your own thinking processes and whatever else you're learning, and that there's other wonky research that just shows that it is actually dumbing down, you know, in terms of what students are coming out with, their knowledge, but also other things like their confidence, you know, their ability to sort of talk about what they've learned, because they actually haven't done the learning themselves. And that's why I think we have to proceed with caution, you know. And I know I work for an ed tech company that is, you know, at the forefront of in terms of what we're doing with AI in this space, but we have to make sure that, and this is why it is a pedagogic conversation and not a technological one, what we're doing is preserving the things that we ultimately value in terms of human skills, human learning and human understanding. And where does AI support with some of that, rather than, you know, replace it? So for me, when I use it in a work context, I'm using it to help get me started, perhaps to give me some prompts, some triggers, some thoughts, to think about things in a way that I hadn't previously done. But if I stop at that point, I know that, and I was literally reading something this morning, and it was, you know, talking about the output being sloppy. And you know, you can look at it sometimes and you can think, oh my goodness, that's just dire. But actually what it's done is given me some place to think, hence AI in the human loop. So that's kind of my take on it.
And just in relation to that, so Said Business School, they found it did support their ideals for skills development. I primarily ask because I mean technology is a tool, not necessarily a value neutral one, but it can impact upon base skills, if that makes sense. The way I usually think of it is being able to navigate utilizing a physical map, a compass, or a sense of direction versus relying on Google Maps to tell you where to go. And I think using that example, of course, it's a too broad to apply to AI necessarily, but I think there's, at least from what I've observed anecdotally, there is a tendency for people to believe exactly what Google Maps will tell them as being accurate, because it has either taken away because they're over reliant on it, or they've never had the chance to develop a baseline skill. And I do wonder within universities, again, if we are, you know, if you're Said Business School, you're part of one of the most expensive, most well-known universities on the entire planet. Are you actually facilitating work-ready graduates if you're using an AI tool that may not necessarily facilitate the baseline skills that an employer expects?
I think quite interesting, not necessarily Said, but I was talking to a vice chancellor of another university last week about what this might do. And the feeling there was that actually, that if we assume sort of a virtual tutor type scenario, some of the more basic tutoring activities can be taken away. So actually, what you're able to do is free up more academic time, because some of the things they would have had to do can now be done by the AI. Therefore, the academic can focus a bit more one-to-one or a bit more seminar group or whatever on testing understanding and testing is the wrong word, but you know, sort of working with the student body on understanding and learning, and also expecting that the student, because they've got access to more information, they're able to do things more quickly, etc., should be developing a deeper understanding and deeper learning. So I think that I thought that was really relevant in terms of how things might change, because I think, but that comes down to an expectation. So I know my students have got these tools, so, and I know what these tools can do. So actually my expectations is going to go up, because actually before, when they might have only looked at the journal and the key text, my expectation now is actually they're referencing a lot more than that. And I can start probing them that, because I might have a bit more time to probe them. Before, when I was standing in front of a class of 500 people and you know, sort of just delivering a slide deck. So I think, again, I think there's some things that will change from student access to information, student actually to be able to interpret the volume of information, and then an expectation from a academic perspective of what the student should know and what you can push the student to know. So I think this swings and roundabouts in what you're saying.
Thank you.
I think it does come back to ultimately professionalism as well. You know, what counts now as entry into a profession if that's changing, you know, if you don't need that core knowledge in quite the same way as you did previously.
Of course.
Cool.
Sorry,
Thank
I'll
you.
stop taking up your time.
No, that's all right.
No, that's brilliant.
All right.
Thank
So
you.
Yeah, really thoughtful.
so I have a question for
Just
our
before you
librarians
do-
in the room.
Just before you
Oh,
do,
sorry,
Rachel,
Simon.
just before you do,
Yeah, go
I just
ahead.
wanted to make a couple of observations here as well. Because of course, this conversation is inevitably focused on higher education. But higher education is just one element of the education system. So there's still a lot of debate, and there's going to be an evolution in terms of what's going to happen in K-12 as well. So I think whatever will happen in higher education over the next few years is going to be informed what happens in K-12 as well. So I think this is clearly we're right at the beginning of the application of AI in our personal lives, in industry, in education. And one thing's for sure, it's going to continue to change and evolve. And I think the other big question, and I don't have an answer to it as well, is what role does the library play as well? Because throughout the last 2 days, a lot of you have talked about their role as enablers and connectors. And I think that's absolutely true. And the role you play is absolutely vital. And inevitably, we're talking a lot about how AI is going to be applied in teaching and learning. And a large part of that is content, whatever the content is. So I just think that inevitably, if we look back 18 months, and I think when Robin used the word paranoia, I think he was probably using that retrospectively. You know, 18 months ago, I think that I certainly saw this and heard it in conversations with academics. The initial reaction predominantly was no, the barriers went up, and it was anxiety, it was paranoia, it was fear, and it was understandable. There was confusion, and I think we've now got to that stage of curiosity, actually probably a little bit of excitement, and people think about possibilities, but still with that need for caution and a careful and thoughtful and considered approach to this, as Rachel has been outlining. Rachel, over to you.
Actually, you've pretty much touched on where my next question was going to go, Simon. And maybe you've already had this conversation, maybe you want to discuss it in your tables, but it was really about the fact, or connected with libraries. So what, in this space then, what does the role of librarians look like? And what do you think that generative AI, agentic AI mean for the future of the university library? So what do you think that, like, you know, your library is going to look like in 5-10 years time, given how disruptive AI has been? Answers on a postcard. Generally, you know, we are. I'm fascinated to hear, you know, what do you think this means for you as librarians and for your sector?
Does anybody have any views about what the future may look like? Is it positive? Is it apocalyptic? What's the sensible? Don't know yet.
Fair enough.
So I'll just summarise. Just talking about inevitable. There's been a lot of debate about data or data, as I may start saying. So a need for more data, more workflows. So more work. I think I'm hearing and sensing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
That was
We've got somebody coming up to talk to you.
Oh, excellent. Hello.
Hi, my
Hello.
name's Wendy. I don't have a deep answer to your question. I'm just going to really shrink it down to my little tiny world of the work that I do, but it leads into a question I had about the Kortext IQ platform. So my job is, a lot of the work I do is in usage data. So how I see AI affecting just my tiny little bubble is the usage data for the electronic resources being completely gobbled up by AI, which we're already starting to see because the summaries get looked at, but the books don't. So my question for you is, that's my answer is that's what I see my job doing, is just like losing my brain about how to fix that. But my question is just on the Kortext platform, Can you tell me, so when the book appeared up in the platform on platform read.cortext, I'm assuming that any usage on that platform is not going to flow through to our institutional usage that the publisher will see and report back to us. Would that be right? And is there a way would there be a way to get usage from the Kortext platform on the book so that we know what's being used,
Yeah,
Good
so
question.
if the book has, so if the students click through to the book, then that will trigger a use of that book.
even if it's on
So
the Kortext platform, if that's where it
yeah,
pops up?
because I don't know what you're using at the moment, but the Kortext platform has an analytics suite of book usage. So you can see at a chapter level or whatever what has been used within a book linked to the module, etc. So I don't know how much you've seen on the Kortext platform in terms of the analytics, and that's probably something it'd be great to sort of set up a Teams call or whatever to take you through. But yeah, there's a whole analytics suite that sits behind Kortext, which shows you exactly what books are being used, how they're being used, what's being read, etc., etc. But interestingly, this isn't the case yet, but I'm just going to expand, and this is an opinion. How publishers get paid, I think, will ultimately come down to books being accessed. So a little bit like Spotify, if the AI is pointing at a Bloomsbury collection, for instance, if the student clicks on that book, then that will probably trigger a use and therefore a payment to the publisher. And that's just a personal opinion, but I can't actually see how it could be any different once you've got an AI, pointing at a lot of different content. How the publisher ultimately get paid is got to be something like that. Simon will probably have a stronger opinion on that than me. But yeah, coming back to your original question, there's an analytics suite that sits behind Kortext, which would be triggered by the AI. And any other use, if the student's got the bookshelf LTI'd into the LMS, for instance, if they open the book again, that would trigger a usage point, which you'll have the analytics behind.
So essentially you'd be needing to look in two different spots because you'd look at your Kortext analytics to get your usage on that platform. But of course, some of the students are still going to, Cambridge University Press and getting it from there. So you're kind of doubling up there.
Yeah. So if that would be correct. So fair enough. Yeah. That's if the but unless if the Cambridge University Press book is hosted on Kortext, but there's another analytics platform. So if they've opened it in Kortext, and you've got something which is all inclusive from an analytics platform, then yes, you do have 2 points of reference effectively. If that book isn't sitting elsewhere, then yes, you do have the Kortext analytics platform.
Thank you. Can I ask another question just on the technical aspect of the platform?
Yeah.
How does it handle digital rights management that exists on the native platform? So, the technology that says full text download not available or chapter download, or does it just inherit the same thing? Do you know?
Yeah,
Making sense?
yes and no. We obviously have our specific publisher relationships. So yeah, by and large, yes. But there may be an exception that we've negotiated, even at a school level, to say actually University of XYZ is able to, download a chapter or print a chapter or whatever it might be. So we can specifically set those, but by and large, yes, we probably inherit from, because we're aggregating. So we're aggregating publisher content, but hosting it on our platform. So by and large, yes, but I do know that we can, work with. So Pearson say, ordinarily this is for Kotler, actually, but University of XYZ, these are your sort of restrictions.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Restrictions. No worries.
Wendy,
Thank
I have
you.
a question. Well, as a former academic, your statement, which I absolutely love, I'm going to quote you: summaries get read, books don't. I mean, that is, I guess, fundamentally my problem with what the AI is doing. And I think it was Kieran was sort of alluding to, is that if all we're doing is engaging with summaries rather than the actual meaningful content, we are getting a superficial level of learning. How do you, or what do you see? And maybe this isn't just for you, but it's for everybody in the room. So don't feel like you have to have the answer here. But how do you see the librarian being able to help to tackle that? Because for me, that's absolutely fundamental. And like I said, you might not have the answer, so it's maybe more a broader question to everybody.
in my role, we're just still trying to understand it. You know, we're still only really seeing the first full year, like, you know, getting data for 2025. We're still only seeing the first full year of data that can really be compared to previous years.
Okay.
I haven't got an answer. We're still in the understanding mode, I think, at the moment, and relying on learning to rely on more value-based metrics other than usage to evaluate, you know, value of content. So, you know, just the disciplinary relevance and strategic objective of the resource and the metadata and the discovery and all the other bits and pieces of what we're looking at now, as well as usage. So, which, you know, we started doing that a couple of years before the AI thing really took off. So kind of happy we are doing that now. But yeah, I don't really have an answer to how we're going to tackle it. Sorry.
A couple of data points.
It shifts the conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah. A couple of data points from us, not necessarily AI related, are we've done a lot of work on premise at University of East London this year with ambassadors and our own marketing team being actually on campus, you know, campus takeovers, etc. And we've seen a significant shift in engagement on the learning content, and upward lift on engagement from some of those old-fashioned approaches of making sure students are aware that the platform's there, making sure they're aware that they've got the books, etc., etc. So there's some data we can share there. And then another thing we've done at King's College London, actually, who have traditionally just wanted the books sitting with the discovery layer in the library, we've actually done some provisioning directly into the LMS this year at King's, and again we've seen a significant uplift in engagement with the learning content from that integration into the LMS at a individual student level. So I still think, coming back to AI, one of the principles of AI is integration into the workflow. I think integrating learning content into the workflow, which isn't always done, again, has a significant effect on the data that we see from students actually accessing the content.
Thank you very much. I will
Thanks.
let someone else talk.
Wendy.
Thank you.
So I think we've got time for one final question back to us. Maybe if there's anything in the room that anybody else would like to explore.
So we might have got to the end of the questions and feedback. Just on this, the point about data and analytics, because I think this came up in one of the conversations yesterday about about the data that you get through different platforms and different aggregators. So I just want to reiterate that Kortext as an organisation very much embraces data, and a lot of our data solutions are incorporated in our services in an extra thing. So content analytics, if you choose to adopt the Kortext platform, you really do get very rich data analytics. So to give you an example, if I've got 100 students studying psychology and I've assigned a psychology book, I can see how many of those 100 students have registered with the Kortext platform, how many of them are actively reading the book. I can see study hours, I can see search terms, I can see which chapters they're accessing. It's a very, very rich level of data. And somebody else said, I want to say, about the importance of the academic and when a book is truly embedded into teaching and learning. We've got an example in India where we're working with Amity University Online. It's the largest online university in India. They've got 200,000 students. We only teach online. They've developed all of their own course materials. So they've got an army of people that have developed all of their course materials in-house, no any commercial content, and it's all been made available through the Kortext platform with all of the features that you see. 94% of students actually use it because it's the only book, and because it's embedded into their teaching and learning, and because all of the assessment is needs to go as well. But I just think, you know, we talked over the last 2 days about reading adoption, reading culture. I think many of us have touched on the fact that students, if they're given the choice, won't buy a book, often they won't read a book, unless their academic tells them, read this book and you will be successful in your module. Every week of this programme, they're going to be running a test on this book. And these are the things that you want to do for this study. Robin, I guess you're putting a trail up to Trial IQ, are you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So just for just totally linking back to the research, you know, that there's lots to be said and can be said about AI, but piloting at whatever level, that might be 3 modules, 300 students or whatever, very much what we're trying to do is get people going. And then by getting people going, we can start to understand some of the questions that we've had today around, you know, how students are adapting to it, how they're using it, how academics are onboarding students, how academics are using it. Otherwise, everything sits in the, well, what might happen. By running a pilot is, well, what is happening, and then how policy can be developed from something that is live. And we're very supportive of getting people up and running with a pilot, and we can do that quite quickly, and then to sort of really get people to understand how this might work in their own institutional context. And by scanning the QR code here, and obviously talking to the team in the room, just, you know, register interest from pilots, and then we can also, you know, maybe do a deeper demo with your own institution and your own sort of wider leadership group, library group, etc., etc. So I thought I'd just leave that up there for a couple of minutes.
Well, a big thank you to Robin and Rachel for for joining us very, very early in the day in the UK. Really appreciate you starting the day so early. You can probably go back to sleep for a couple of hours now. And thank you for a really interesting discussion, and probably the most unique hybrid session we've ever seen ever. So
well, thank you all very much for having us. Thank you for accommodating our hybrid discussion, and Simon, thank you for facilitating it and making it work as well. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Lovely to meet you virtually. Cheers. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye. Bye.